Okay, so you want to stay informed, but, without drowning in news, right?
Yeah, you need the important stuff, not just noise.
Exactly. And that's what we're doing today. We're looking closely at something pretty big. The White House is thinking about a Section 301 investigation.
Into semiconductor imports, specifically.
Right, which could mean new tariffs down the line.
And look, this isn't just some abstract economic thing. It affects almost everything.
How so?
Well, think about it. Your average new car, it's got like over 1,000 semiconductors in it.
1,000. Wow.
Yeah. So these chips are everywhere. Smartphones, computers, critical systems.
So this investigation, it could really hit home.
Definitely. It could impact the cost of your gadgets, the wider economy, and, yeah, the whole U.S.-China relationship.
Okay, so we've dug into a report that really breaks this down.
Lays out the potential consequences.
And our mission here in this deep dive is to pull out the key pieces, help you understand what's going on, what might happen next.
Without getting totally lost in the weeds or the jargon.
Exactly. All right, let's get into it.
So the core issue, it starts with semiconductors themselves.
These tiny chips.
Tiny, but incredibly complex. They're the brains, basically, in almost all modern electronics.
Can't really overstate how important they are.
Not at all. Global economy, modern life.
Yeah.
It all runs on them.
And now the White House might launch this Section 301 investigation into where the U.S. gets them.
Right, Section 301, you might remember that name from other trade disputes.
Vaguely, yeah. It's a tool the U.S. has.
Exactly. It lets the government investigate what it sees as unfair trade practices by other countries, things that might harm U.S. industries.
And if they find something?
Then the outcome could be new import duties, tariffs.
So a new tax, potentially, on imported chips.
That's the bottom line, yeah.
Okay, so why now? What's pushing this?
Well, the report points to a few things. A big one is definitely the pandemic.
The chip shortages.
Exactly. Remember how hard it was to get, like, cars or PlayStation?
Oh, yeah. Nightmare.
That really, really highlighted how vulnerable we are to disruptions in these global supply chains.
I mean, everyone realized how much we depend on chips coming from overseas.
Absolutely. It was a wake-up call. So there's this push now for, more resilience, maybe making more chips closer to home.
And it's not just about supply chains, right? There's geopolitics involved.
Oh, for sure. That's a huge piece of this. The report notes that Taiwan dominates manufacturing for the most advanced chips.
How much?
Something like 60% of the really cutting-edge stuff.
60%? Wow.
Yeah. And meanwhile, you've got China pouring resources into building up its own semiconductor industry.
So it's a mix of economic worries and, national security concerns.
Definitely. Access to the best chips is seen as, strategically vital now for the economy, for advanced tech, even for the military.
And Taiwan being the main producer,
Yeah.
That makes things complicated.
Very. And China's ambitions add another layer.
So the U.S. has already done something about this, hasn't it? The TIPS Act.
Right. The 2022 CGCPS and Science Act, that's a big investment, trying to boost domestic production with funding, tax breaks.
But building these factories, these fabs, that takes time.
A lot of time. And it's incredibly complex and expensive. It's not an overnight fix.
And while that's happening, China's been making moves too.
Yeah, the report mentions China putting export restrictions on some key materials needed for chip making.
Ah, okay. So that probably adds to the sense of urgency in D.C.
You'd have to think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Raises concerns.
So let's go back to Section 301. What exactly would they investigate? What counts as unfair?
Well, the report mentions things like dumping. That's basically selling chips in the U.S. for less than they cost to make to undercut competitors unfairly.
Right.
Or intellectual property theft.
Right.
Stealing chip designs, manufacturing secrets, that kind of thing.
And if the investigation finds evidence of that,
then tariffs become a real possibility.
And the target would presumably be China.
Primarily, yes. But the report makes a good point. It's tricky.
How so?
Because tariffs could also hit allies. Think about South Korea, Taiwan. They're huge players in the semiconductor world, too.
Right. Companies like Samsung, TSMC.
Exactly. So the U.S. has to tread carefully. It shows how tangled these global tech supply chains really are. Slap tariffs on one place, and it ripples out.
Okay, let's imagine they do impose tariffs.
Ah.
What happens then? What's the impact?
Well, the most direct thing, according to the report, is imported chips get more expensive because of the tax.
Right.
And that creates potential winners and losers.
Okay, who wins?
Potentially US-based chip makers like Intel, Texas Instruments maybe. Their domestic chips suddenly look more price competitive.
Makes sense. And the losers?
Companies that rely heavily on those imported chips, think Apple, maybe Ford, their costs go up.
And where do those costs usually end up?
Passed on to us, most likely. The report suggests consumers could end up paying more.
For phones, laptops, cars, pretty much anything with a chip.
That's the potential risk, yeah. Could add to inflation.
And this brings up the big one, trade war risk.
Absolutely. It's a major concern. The report reminds us what happened back in 2018.
With the tariffs on Chinese goods.
Yeah. China retaliated pretty quickly, put tariffs on U.S. stuff like soybeans, bourbon.
Right, I remember that. So could we see that again?
It's definitely possible. The report mentions China could hit back by, say, restricting exports of rare earth minerals.
The stuff needed for magnets? Batteries.
Exactly. Crucial materials. Or they could make things difficult for U.S. tech companies operating in China.
And what about those allies we mentioned? Samsung, TSMC, they're kind of stuck in the middle.
In a really tough spot. Because remember, they're also investing billions to build new fabs in the U.S. right now, partly because of the TCPS Act.
Oh, right. So they could get hit by U.S. tariffs on imports and potentially be affected by U.S.-China tensions even while they're investing here.
It's incredibly complex for them, yeah, caught between giants.
So the report really stresses this isn't just about trade, is it?
No, not at all. It's framed as a much bigger contest, a competition for technological dominance, basically.
Over what kind of tech?
The foundational stuff, AI, quantum computing, and the super advanced chips needed for all that, plus, modern weapon systems.
So securing a lead in chips is seen as critical for, well, everything. National security, economic future.
That seems to be the thinking, yes. It's ground zero for 21st century competitiveness.
But then there's that quote, the supply chain complexity.
Yeah, the Paul Triolo quote from the Financial Times. It's a good one.
What was it again?
Something like, the semiconductor supply chain is the most complex in the world. It cannot be changed overnight.
Right. Which just highlights how hard it is to suddenly decouple or bring it all home.
Exactly. It's a decades-long process to build up these kinds of ecosystems. You can't just flip a switch.
So this leads to different views on whether tariffs are even the right tool, I guess.
For sure. The report lays out the arguments. Critics say tariffs are clumsy.
Oh, so?
They could actually stifle innovation if they make components too expensive for everyone, and they could just fuel inflation.
Okay. But the other side?
The argument for tariffs, as the report presents it, is that they're necessary. A way to protect America's silicon shield.
Silicon shield,
Yeah.
meaning a secure domestic supply.
Yeah, ensuring we have the chips we need for the economy and for defense, even if it costs more in the short term.
So valid points on both sides, high stakes.
Incredibly high stakes, yeah. This goes way beyond just the price of your next phone. It's about global power, future tech.
So what's the timeline? What should we watch for?
The report suggests this Section 301 investigation could actually start pretty soon, maybe within weeks.
Okay. And if it leads to tariffs?
Potentially by 2025, maybe. These things take time, investigations, comment periods.
And meanwhile, the lobbying is intense, I bet.
Oh, yeah. You've got the big tech companies, the ones using lots of imported chips, probably pushing for exemptions or arguing against tariffs altogether.
And the U.S. chip makers.
Likely supporting the investigation, hoping it levels the playing field or boosts demand for their products.
And tariffs aren't the only option on the table.
No, the report mentions Congress might also push for tighter export controls.
Meaning restricting what kind of chip tech can be sold to China.
Exactly. Blocking access to the most advanced stuff. That's already happening to some extent, but pressure could mount for more.
So, looking longer term, what's the big picture?
The report talks about this possibly speeding up a global chip war.
Sounds dramatic.
Well, maybe. But you see the US, China, even the EU, everyone's scrambling now, pouring money into becoming more self-sufficient in chips, research, design, manufacturing.
Everyone wants their own secure supply.
That seems to be the trend. Less reliance on potentially unstable global chains.
Okay, so for listeners, in the near term, what should they expect? What might they actually notice?
Well, as we said, potential price bumps on electronics are a real possibility.
Right.
Yeah. And maybe more supply chain hiccups depending on how companies react and if there's retaliation. And just generally, heightened tensions, more headlines about US-China tech friction.
So definitely something to keep an eye on.
For sure. It's going to have ripple effects for a while, impacting lots of things we use every day.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for breaking that all down. It's Definitely complex, but important to understand.
It really is. And this story is far from over, so
Yeah, hopefully this deep dive helped clarify the main issues and what could be coming.
agreed. And maybe just one final thought to leave folks with.
Okay.
Thinking about how incredibly globalized tech and trade are, like that quote about the supply chain, is pushing for self-sufficiency, mainly with tariffs, really the best long-term play? Or, are there other ways, maybe more diplomacy, collaboration that could work better for innovation and stability down the road?
Yeah, that's the multi-billion dollar question, isn't it?
Something to chew on.